joining us from Sporting News on Twitter at TSN Mike. Mike, happy holidays, happy early New Year. How are you?
I'm very well. Happy New Year to you as well, Adam.
So I appreciate that. Just before the holidays, just before Christmas, you wrote about how that just disgusting, embarrassing first round of the college football playoff with blowout after blowout after blowout. Like, I was tweeting about it at the time, like, my God, the first year of the new format, how the committee must be feeling right now with all the judgment going in, and then Indiana with that stinker that it had until, I guess, put up some too little too late points toward the end of the game to make the score a little bit more respectable, but it was bad. The question is, though, because you wrote about how maybe the format, the 12-team format, needs to be reassessed and fixed, and just how ugly it was, can all be forgiven now in this quarterfinal round if we get 4 good games? What does it ultimately do to the committee and to the sport where we're at, expanding from 4 to 12?
Well, I think in some ways, if we had 4 good games, it would affirm the decisions that the committee and the college football playoff at large made relative to the construction of the playoff. And I know they have input from conference commissioners and such. I love the college football playoff being 12 teams. I think that it absolutely is essential. I don't think there's any other word. Essential that there be automatic qualification for the 5 highest ranked conference champions. It's not a real playoff without that. But there's no rule that says, and certainly this doesn't apply in the NCAA men's basketball tournament, there's no rule that says you have to get an advantage seed because you won a conference. Lots of teams get number 1 seeds in the NCAA tournament without winning their conferences, either regular season or the tournament. That happened with Tennessee in 2019, Pitt in 2009, off the top of my head examples. Won neither their regular season or conference championships, but were judged to be one of the 4 best teams. So I don't think that seeding Boise State and Arizona State into the quarterfinals was the right call. Everything else they did was great, but doing that disadvantaged the first round, made it so there were more mismatches. I mean, Indiana versus Boise State might have been a great game, but we'll never know. And you look in the quarterfinals, and you've got Ohio State going in as a favorite against a team that's with an undefeated record and was the number 1 overall seed in the tournament. That doesn't seem right. That seems like there's a mismatch in seeding there. Mm-hmm. And then you have double-digit seed favorites that had to play in the first round and are now playing against quarterfinal opponents that got seeds. So I think the same about the NFL. I mean, the fact that either the Vikings or the Lions are going to have to go on the road and play against an 8 or 9 win team in a couple of weeks is ridiculous. But I think that the college football playoff should have followed the example of the superior postseason, and that's the NCAA tournament, not the NFL playoffs.
Do you think the expanded format really kind of further waters down these bowl games? Like, people should have, and maybe people were, but not to the degree that ordinarily they would be. We should have been elated to have, like, New Year's Eve, and we've got Alabama against Michigan. I know these 2 schools, these programs weren't this year what they have been historically. Certainly it wasn't the Rose Bowl last year, in seeing them this year. And then you sprinkle, all around college football, saying that, all right, well, if I'm a bettor, how do I even wager on this game, knowing that, the coach left, or the coordinators have left, the best players have sat out because they've declared for the NFL draft, or, look how many guys aren't playing because they're in the transfer portal, to where it's like, it feels like you have JV teams out there, high school teams out there. I know that wasn't the case specifically with Alabama, Michigan, but do these games just feel that much less important?
I think that's fair to say. They're important to the schools that have the teams in the games. If you're a Pitt fan, you wanted to see them beat Toledo, or you're a Alabama fan, you wanted to see them beat Michigan. I think it matters to them, and it gives networks good programming that people watch because they like football, and it is something to wager on, although it is a challenge to figure out how teams are going to perform when they are not whole. But that's been a problem really in college football, starting probably 20 years ago when coaches started taking jobs and leaving before the bowl games. That's probably when it began. I remember specifically when Brian Kelly left Cincinnati with an undefeated team to go take the Notre Dame job. That was sort of the apotheosis of that particular practice. And then you started to see players opt out. And then you started to see the transfer portal have an impact as well. So all of that has watered the bowl games down a bit. But I've always said, Adam, that the reality is that the people who claim that the bowls have been good for college football aren't telling the truth. The bowls have always been good for the bowls. And that's really all. That's all the further it goes. If you're a player in one of those games, you got a nice trip and maybe a good swag bag. But the games never were consequential beyond whatever game was designated as the national championship game in that particular year.
You mentioned before the Lions and the Vikings, and of course they have such an important Week 18 matchup coming up to determine not only who wins the NFC North, but who gets that first round bye, that number one overall seed in the NFC going into the postseason. And I've been saying for months, Bills, Lions. That's the Super Bowl I believe we will get. It's the Super Bowl that I certainly want as a fan. I think it'd be wildly entertaining. But what I'm wondering is, that bye week, it does matter. If somehow, and I don't believe this will happen, but it could, if somehow Minnesota does win this Week 18 matchup, and we see Detroit have to play in the opening round, they don't get that rest, already dealing with a bunch of injuries, the Lions, does the possibility of Dan Campbell's squad advancing all the way become just a little bit more unrealistic? Do you look at the Lions differently than if they get the one seed?
Well, it becomes a much greater challenge. When the Steelers won the Super Bowl in 2005, they were the first team that was seeded at the bottom of the bracket. They were a 6 at that. They were the 6th seed, even though they were a double-digit win team, because again, the nature of the playoff seeding, they were the lowest team in the bracket, and they had to win at Cincinnati, at Indianapolis, and then at Denver in order to advance to the Super Bowl. So it is a daunting challenge, and it does make it more difficult, and it kind of makes it more annoying when you're a team like Minnesota, or Detroit. We're talking about you're a team like Detroit that's been fantastic all year, and they make you go on the road. It's ridiculous, and I think there's a little bit of annoyance at that as well, that you have to go prove it against a team that clearly isn't as accomplished as you are. And because of the playoff format still existing as it does, you have to do that. So it would be whoever has to take that lesser seed in this case is at a significant disadvantage without a doubt. There's a lot to play for in that Lions-Vikings game.
So in that this week, you wrote about a vote against, as you put it, Nick Saban being the commissioner of college football. I think we need Mike DeCourcy to be the commissioner of some of these, whether it's college football or the NFL. We need you to come in and rewrite some of this stuff and make it make more sense.
I would love that, especially because Roger Goodell gets paid north of $30 million. So if I could come in and do it for a year and rewrite some of that stuff, and then retire on that 30 mil, I think that would be a nice deal. So, Adam, if you have any influence on that, I'm all for it. Not that I don't love the jobs I have now, but heck.
Yeah, that one, I guess it feels a little thankless, but there are a lot of thankless jobs that you could have that don't pay you north of $30 million a year. So, I'll take that one. That sounds pretty good. Mike DeCourcy, again, over at Sporting News, a columnist. He's based out of Pittsburgh. We really appreciate you hopping on with us here on Pharrell Coast to Coast. Happy New Year to you, man.
Happy New Year, Adam, and to everybody listening as well.